Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. I know I'm the last speaker between you and dinner, so I'll try to be as engaging as possible. I love design. I'm the director of user experience design at Lucid Software. Some of you may have used some of these products, but these are the products that Lucid Software develops. The one we're most known for is Lucid Chart. Lucid Chart is diagramming software. It's a diagramming product in the cloud. So think flow charts, workflow diagrams, process engineering. This is a product that's used by many different people in many different industries. But beyond kind of the boxes and arrows, we find lots of different users and customers trying to communicate. They're really using our product to communicate something that's complex or is behind a wall or is across teams that span different states and countries. But diagramming is a really important communication tool in the world of increasing complexity. Lucid Chart, or Lucid Software is only about 6 or 7 years old. We're going through this transition right now from startup to a growth phase. We seem to double about each year. UX design is only about 3 years old at Lucid. So when I first started, there was just another designer, and now we have a team of 6 and plan to hire 3 more by the end of the year. So inside of this really dynamic world of diagramming and company growth, this question gets asked a lot by the young designers on my team, a lot of whom are kind of developing a career. And I've put a list of kind of methods, design methods and processes off to the right, your right, my left, that I think kind of encompass a standard or are used inside of a standard design process. But really, these are tools and methods that are used by designers in order to create value for customers. But oftentimes as designers, and especially inside of Lucid where there's a large amount of growth and change, we also have to be accountable to the business. The business is also asking this question, well, what is UX design? And I don't know how many of you have ever worked at a company where design is new, but they often think it's colors and buttons. And over the last 3 years, we've really had to help the company understand and come to this agreement around what design really is, UX design. So I have this gross oversimplification of a product development process here. I don't mean development as in write code, I mean development as in what does it take to bring a product to market. And oftentimes those processes and methods that I listed there focus on this kind of aspect of the design and development process. But like some of the other speakers have mentioned today, UX design is more than that. And what we've really tried to do at Lucid is to help the designers and the business understand that really there's a purview that's larger than just that kind of initial stage of understanding before design is released to engineering, which is released to customers. And that's not easy. Like I mentioned, in a dynamic company and with young designers, there's this temptation to proceduralize everything and to tell people, take these steps in order to design. And while there's efficiency there, oftentimes there can be a lack of judgment. And so while being a fan of design process, what my company and what I've tried to do with my team is actually bring to bear a method and a framework for judgment, making design accountable to both the business and our users. And this is the method that I wanted to share with you today. The title of my presentation is Fission Diffusion, and I'll actually end up getting to that. I'll cover that in kind of the T aspect or dealing with time. But this is what I call the right model, and the principles in there that I wanted to share with you, and hopefully you can take back to your design team, or you can critique your own design process through these principles, and hopefully it changes the way you think about the value of design in your design process. The first of these in the right method is risk. Here's a simple definition of risk. exposure to danger, injury, or loss. Now, all businesses, and especially inside of a product development process, we have to deal with risk. I thought I would illustrate a couple of examples and contrast them. The first being the auto industry. If you design and manufacture cars, what it takes to align resources and to build a manufacturing process for a platform has tremendous costs, right? You have to train people, you have to program robots to weld and to build to build an automobile. And that investment in your manufacturing process oftentimes is not very flexible. You better make sure you have your manufacturing process down and the design of your car right, because you can't easily change up that production line. And so being an automobile manufacturer and dealing with this kind of production timeline, you inherit certain risks there about getting the design right and making sure there's quality and checks built in. If you contrast that with the medical industry, arguably they don't have the same cost to manufacture like medicine like a car manufacturer does. It doesn't cost them the same to develop a product or service like in the form of a pill. And there's actually some controversy in that, right? Like we wonder why we pay $300 or $400 for a prescription. It's not for the production costs. It's for you're paying for 10 to 12 years of research. And so the risk associated with product development for a medical company or for a medicine is really to offset the risk of killing somebody or being sued, right? And so you can see how for different products you inherit this risk based off of the product or service that you're providing. Well, software is no different. The products and services that we design and deliver have risk associated with them, right? Being in business has risk associated with it. But sometimes in this world of computers and design, that becomes abstracted, right? And as designers, we're kind of removed from that understanding. And we get caught in these agile cycles and we get focused on processes and methods, and we sometimes forget about those risks, but they're very important to a designer to understand the risks that a business takes on. Here's some questions that I think help bring that a little closer to designers and questions that I ask of my team when we're dealing with risk. What is the investment to design something right? When can you afford to be wrong? What is the most important thing to get right? And so when we begin to answer these questions on my team and we look at the type of risk that design takes on, we're better able to provide value to our customers and the business. Now, I think every product and service in this kind of ecosystem has different risks. Here are Lucid's risks. Over the years, we've been able to prove out this a traditional desktop value and on the web with technology, and we have a killer engineering team at Lucid. They can build whatever you ask them to build. Our challenges as a design team are making sure that we deliver the right thing for them to build and to make sure we're using them as resources in an effective, responsible way. And also we have to make sure that as that gets delivered to customers, that we stay in touch with that value over time to make sure we kind of build a feedback system into our process. Here's some other risks. Lucid Chart is a general business tool. It's used by many different people in many different situations. And so like understanding uniqueness and making decisions for individual versus the whole or certain industries becomes challenging. We're a freemium product, so we have to be very careful about the value that we provide to people for different levels of payment, including kind of a free experience. You don't want to give away too much, but you also want people to kind of perceive the value on the other side of a payment. I already mentioned different users, but we have expert diagramming users, but we also have this huge market of people that are new to diagramming and are new to communicating visually and to visual reasoning. And finally, we have to be very, very careful about key performance indicators. And there's a number of those at our business that as we design, we have to make sure that the design work doesn't disrupt any of those. And some of those KPIs are short-term, like payments and revenue, while others have kind of a longer game, like sharing. So I wanted to share with you a couple of examples of how my design team has worked with the KPI of sharing and how we've had to be responsible for kind of upholding this and making sure that the product and company has additional customers in a year from now. This is the old document management service that existed when I first got there. I thought there would be more booing and hissing, and what a terrible sight. And so we took on this project to improve our document management. We call it the docs list portion of our product. And we did some simple analysis kind of around the features that were used the most and where behavior was located through some other products that we use. We also did some kind of simple information hierarchy design work, right? Trying to understand what features were used the most and how to prioritize more valuable features. Here's just a simple, some simple statistics run in Excel. And this is actually the final design here. And we took functionality that had traditionally been split apart in the product and been on that right side, and we embodied it inside of these tiles. Document titles, very similar to how Google manages their document management system. And as we tested this new design, oh man, we were so excited to see increased payments. Payments started going up, right, as we ran this in different tests. But we began to kind of sacrifice that long game because sharing had dropped. And this is one of the first times my design team we were forced to kind of deal with this KPI. The business would not let us give up that long game for increased payments. And so after a few meetings of like scratching our heads and wondering what the problem was, we kind of developed some hypotheses and made some changes. Some of the questions we asked ourselves were like, well, here's the card. Clearly there's a share icon, but maybe it's too abstract. Maybe we need to be more explicit. Other questions we asked ourselves were, we wondered if we were diluting shares by having too many functional icons next to each other. And finally, we hypothesized that this gear icon, perhaps it has such a strong affordance that it kind of overpowers the other functionality. And we wondered if users were actually going there to share instead of clicking on the share icon. So here was our redesign. We ran another test. We were more explicit about share, and we actually used a more kind of benign icon to bucket the other functionality with this ellipses, and we just kind of put a more button there. And you had to right-click to get to it. Or after this, you had to select it, or over here on the right, you had to then, by selecting it, type in names as that tile was selected. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me move back here. So this is an example of how the design team at Lucid has to be responsible for some of these KPIs. It isn't always easy. I want to share another story with you where solving the share problem and designing actually has taken months and lots of different kind of data points. Here's the old editor. You can see the share button up in the upper right-hand corner. And as we designed the new diagramming editor, we positioned share in a relatively similar location. But again, as we run tests, we've had a really hard time keeping shares up. Shares as our KPI continues to be lower in the old version of the product. And so we took a similar approach, and we kind of did a heuristic evaluation, asking similar questions from the lessons before, right? Well, maybe it's the color. Maybe it's the surrounding functionality, and maybe we're diluting it again. You can see in this bottom example with too much functionality kind of surrounding share, but we still could not get shares. We could not bring shares up to a level that was equal to or greater than the old editor. And you can imagine being a designer that like being really frustrated, right? Like you believe in this design work, but the stats just aren't showing that it's winning, right? And so you have to take a hard look at what you do and the decisions you make. So what we did was we began to take this information from our A/B test, and we went and looked for other sources of information or insight in areas like customer and user research. So over the last 6 months, we've actually been doing a lot of user research to kind of document the different types of users who use our product. And every time we talk to a user, we actually record a phone call and then get it transcribed, and we code it so we can go back and look at what people were saying. And we went back and started reading through and looking for different manifestations of sharing. And really what that became was our understanding of sharing began to change, right? We always thought that sharing happened through a blue button called share. But if you really look at sharing in a workflow, it sounds more like distribution, right? Or approval. And here are some examples of that we found in our transcripts. I print off to show my coworkers. I email my diagram to my boss for his approval, or I put your diagram in my presentation. They're still trying to share, right? But they're doing it in a different way than the product kind of prescribed. And then more recently, with that in mind, as we've been on phone calls, we've been very direct with customers and users. I sat in on a phone call a couple weeks back and just point blank asked a customer looking for some kind of gem to latch onto to help explain maybe this phenomenon, and came across this, right? So when I share a document using your system, I know that the recipient will have to create an account in your system before they can see my diagram. Why would I force them to do that just to communicate with me? So maybe sharing, this idea started to emerge. Maybe sharing was actually like a barrier. And in fact, when I talked to this user, I was like, man, you're right. Why would I share? Especially if I know that that's the outcome of sharing. So that became like another data point for us, going back and using user research. We also rolled back the clock to some really early design decisions, wondering if we had overlooked something early on, that maybe the problem wasn't in share, but somewhere in this entire ecosystem, the product generally. We went back to some early design decisions where in the file menu, just doing some simple analysis, understanding people's behavior. A lot of people clicked on download, and so a lot of people were using download in the file menu. So the design work on the right shows how we move that higher up in the file menu to help people download. Right? We're just trying to be a good user experience designer, give people what they want and to help them. We also encountered another insight and use a piece of information about, as we designed this new product, we put it into a beta so users could use this new product, and if they wanted to go back to the old product, they could move between them. And we always asked for people's feedback as they left the beta environment where we were testing design ideas to kind of collect an understanding about what they were missing or what they didn't like in a little form like this. and, um, and then we actually categorized those responses, and one of the biggest responses here was users can't find something. We moved their cheese too much, right? Like we changed too many things, and they were looking for a feature and they couldn't find it. So what we ended up doing a few months back was we actually created this feature called Feature Find. It's the snazzy kind of binocular icon feature by sharing. And if you click on this, we will tell you where a feature is in the UI that we may have moved around. Well, guess what the #1 searched item was in Feature Find? It was download. So here's design, right? And over time, through all these little design decisions, we've been trying to kind of help users, and eventually you get to this tipping point in a workflow, either through resistance or you open up another path with design changes, and we begin to kind of affect people's behavior in this system. And so the story still isn't complete. Our current hypothesis is we're actually kind of sabotaging shares by opening up and making other forms of distribution more apparent to the user. And it's actually forced the business to rethink the KPI of sharing. And we've been doing some more work to help users when they actually click on share to get through that process faster. So the people who really want to share will help you do that, and also try to maintain value by helping people distribute and communicate using other means. But these are two examples that deal with risk and how my design team has to work with the business and be accountable for our design work. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. But I know the product team and business team have really appreciated kind of that diligence in solving some of these problems. Okay, moving on. The next principle here in the right method is yield. So you have design investment. We use one of those processes or methods, and hopefully you got something out of it. I think a lot of times as designers, we feel like something is valuable because of the effort we put into something. But when you really start looking at design helping the entire business, you have to begin asking yourself the question, well, how is it valuable to others, not just myself as a designer? Here's our gross oversimplification of development process. You spend time doing something, you better get something out of it. And sometimes when you proceduralize things, you stop making the connections about why you do something. And this is something that I've tried to be really careful at Lucid. We often say, well, if we conduct research, that will yield better design. But what we're really saying is, if we conduct research, then that should yield insights. And if you really want to go a step further, it's, well, if we conduct research, we should be able to get insights from that and make decisions that help improve the design. And sometimes that can be lost in a process. And so yield is very important. It keeps my designers and my team focused on what are they getting out of their design effort. And here's some examples of that. Sometimes we design to learn ourselves. Sometimes we designed in order to portray something accurately or to collaborate with others or even to instill confidence. Here's a little graph that my team looks at and we often fiddle with. This shows the different activities that we've tried conducting, design activities we've tried conducting at Lucid. The blue represents kind of the cost to us, and the yellow represents kind of what we get out of it. You'll notice, like on-site visits, they cost my company a lot, and we don't get a lot out of them. I think that has to do with, if you go back to some of those risks, right? Making sure that what it takes to really talk to a significant amount of users to understand a problem that can be mapped back to all of the users, like that there's an incredible cost there. We get a lot out of A/B testing. My company has developed an internal A/B testing platform that any engineer can kind of turn on and off, within a few minutes. So we get a lot of value out of that. So I wanted to share some examples of yield and getting something out of your design effort. When we were designing our new product about a year ago, I realized that in order to kind of convince the business of the value that we could get out of redesigning the editor, the main part of our product, I had to do that with information that was of high quality and very sound. I didn't feel like I could convince the business nor gather feedback from users, based off of information from a paper prototype. I'm about to ask 40 engineers to do what I want them to do. And so we felt like we needed a prototyping system to help vet out our ideas that had these types of qualities. A prototyping system where we could get situational feedback, where a user could kind of do some self-directed testing on their own and that had open-ended exploration. Here's a couple examples of tools that we experimented and tried with before choosing one. The one on the left is Envision. We felt like that was too linear for our single-page app and the richness that we needed to provide. Plus, if you don't click in the right spot, the tool tells you where to click with a blue square. The one on the right, and I apologize, this one's just going to loop over and over, is Principle. So it's a little more dynamic. It doesn't have these discrete states, but still we weren't able to have kind of this richness that we were looking at. So we played with HTML and JavaScript. I have a couple of designers on my team that have like a front-end background. And you can kind of see how dynamic this is. You can actually play with text and move things around. And so we decided to write an open drawer and add things and delete things. And so we actually decided to invest in our own prototyping system internally. And it took a couple of months. There were 2 designers on my team. It took them 2 months to build this. But we built it in a way, we realized if we're going to build this, we need to build it in a way that it's reusable by all the designers over a longer period of time. So we actually built this with Angular 1 and literally built components so other designers who weren't as tech savvy could pick this up. And this is the end result right here. This is what we put in front of customers when we are vetting out these design ideas and trying to understand the value and problems of the existing product. You can change colors, you can drag things from the canvas and put them over into like a shape panel on the left. You can see that right there. You can open drawers and move things around. And what this allowed us to do is to have some really powerful conversations with users without having engineering kind of devote resources quite yet. And it allowed us to change our approach to gathering feedback and testing. Plus, it was, at the time we were using CodePen, so we could just send people links and they could just click on it and have this experience themselves. Right, so imagine the feedback you get when you ask the question on the right instead of the left, right? One is more directed, while the one on the right allows for somebody to run into walls and to explore a little bit and to really explore this single-page app in a way where they can relate almost an experience back to you. And that was right for Lucid. It might not be right for you or your design teams, but what we were able to do is, because we built this in a way that it could be reused over time through Angular 1 components, we actually lowered the cost of prototyping and we increased the yield of it, and then there were some other downstream effects. Because it was written in code, the engineers were able to kind of pick some of the pieces up from this and run with them faster as we began development. We don't always invest in big things like that, right? Remember, the principle is yield. Here's some other things that we've been experimenting with in the product, the new product. The way to change color on the canvas traditionally has been split up by text, shape, and line color. And when you watch people using this product and they want to change the color of a shape, color and shape and diagrams is really important. They have to move around a lot just to like configure the color of something. So we've been playing around, and at least in wireframes and in Sketch, with ideas like that, or we've wondered if we should combine them into one kind of color system. We've also wondered, what should that icon be? Should it be a paint bucket or a paintbrush or an ink drop? And what that would take design to understand and to get on the phone with customers might take us 3 days, and in that time we could talk with 20 users. Well, we could just have an engineer build that in 2 days, and we could test that with 20,000 users and really understand the effects that that has on our KPIs much faster. So sometimes we punt and we actually say, hey, we have an idea, let's just test it. Let's not invest a lot here. We're better off having engineering kind of invest in this and to run a test and to learn from that test. But I don't think it really matters the process or method if you really think about the outcome of what you're doing, and you look at all the available processes and tools inside of this kind of design ecosystem at your company. And I don't think it really matters what it is. Like I've seen, at least inside of my own company, it helps us make better design process decisions. It helps us get more ideas out to users faster sometimes, and improves the quality of what we're doing. The last one here is, the last principle here that I would like you to think about, and hopefully you can take back to your organizations, is T. That stands for time. This is where I might get put on a do not fly list. Is that what they call it? Time underpins everything in design process. It is a part of investment and risk. It's a part of yield and delivery. Companies have to match this timing and make sure they bring products to market on time. And as a design team, this is where you really get ahead, and you can buy time for yourself to do those projects that are really important, that you know you should do, but you just sometimes can't. You don't have the time for it. All right, Fission Diffusion. Don't think bomb, think time, because the principles in fission and fusion really are timing principles. In the natural world, when you take a fissile material, uranium, it's unstable. It naturally decays on its own. By the way, I'm grossly oversimplifying nuclear physics. It's naturally decaying on its own, releasing energy as it changes form. And I find this to be like really interesting. It's always been really interesting to me how much energy you can get out of processes like this. And what you do is, the goal of a fissile reaction or a fission reaction is to accelerate that, right? And to take something that has this potential and to get that energy to release faster, kind of all at once. Well, I see design being the same thing. Think of a fissile material as being like a design product or a project. When you apply a focused force to this, literally like synchronized kinetic energy, with the right timing in a fission reaction, you're able to accelerate the potential energy in this material, and it kind of releases all at once. I see design as this being a mechanism in this reaction to releasing more potential in a design process. I want to share 2 examples with you that deal with timing. The first one here is fission. So I mentioned to you before that as users exited the beta for our new product, we collected this information from them. Well, that was not easy. Here's our beta feedback process. So a user would click on the beta button and go into our beta. They would click around, and if they decided that there was too much friction in that experience or they didn't like it, they could go back to the old product. And as they exited, they would leave feedback. That got That was dumped into Zendesk that our customer support team managed and used. And then they kind of went through that, and if there was a problem or a bug, they would file that in Jira, right? The graveyard for like all technology things, where design dies. Anyways, and so you can imagine being a design team and trying to like get this feedback out of Jira, right? And if you have I think our product's pretty well built, but we still have like 500 or 600 bugs in it, right? Everything from big to small. And at that point, it's not feedback anymore, right? Like, that's called research. Like, you can't, when you have to go digging for that, and that takes like a week or two to turn on the beta and to like go dig and find this feedback, and hopefully the person in customer support like filed a ticket in the right place. Like, I mean, it's kind of a crapshoot, and it takes a lot of time. And so thinking about this like metaphor of fission, I noticed this was taking a lot of time. And so I went to customer support and I pulled an engineer aside and I said, hey listen, I've got this idea. What if you're piping information from this HTML form into Zendesk. Can you pump it into Slack? And so within a few hours, I had an engineer who had programmed this, and he was pumping this feedback into a Slack channel that we had created. So I didn't have to wait for customer support to like organize this feedback and to file tickets. Now, they still needed to be filed for an engineer to work on, but getting that feedback real time allowed my designers and my design team to like wrap their heads around possible problems and to begin thinking about possible solutions. Here's a couple examples. This one on the bottom, I don't know if you can read it. It talks about a user is expressing the desire to use a master template. Well, we have that feature, he just can't find it. This is an example here. I'll read this one off. I have a chart I made and did arrange auto layout hierarchy and can't get it to go back to the grid. Well, that's not like it's a usability problem, but that's not something my team would take on. That's something I would point a finger at an engineer and say, hey, that's a bug. Like, this is affecting the performance of our beta. And so being able to like get more value and get that potential energy out of feedback faster really helped my team kind of own and contribute to the evolution of the product faster. We didn't have to rely on somebody else. Now, customer support, they still went through and categorized this stuff, and as they should, it just allowed us to kind of, peek in the door a little bit faster. That becomes really, time becomes really important with all the things we do, not just feedback. Let's move on to Fusion. This is really where the NSA might get on my case. Fusion is about capturing energy and chaining reactions. That's the simplified version. In a fusion reaction, you actually take the energy generated from a fission reaction, remember, synchronized timed force, and you capture that. And what you do is if you capture that energy and you apply that energy to certain materials, they form new atoms. And in the act of that, there's additional energy released. And also, sometimes that's actually used for fuel to continue a reaction. And so think about fusion. This is where the magic really happens, I think, when you've really fine-tuned your design process is you're understanding risk. You've thought about your methods and processes in terms of what you get out of them. You're starting to like play with timing. And if you can like capture the energy that you've created in this process and you begin to chain it, you get even more value out of it. Let me give you an example of that. Going back to this, as we captured this feedback, we also were able to, for one of the problems that we were collecting feedback on had to do with the page management. We had explored some pretty innovative ways of moving pages and adding pages that didn't sit well with kind of the design team and the original product. But those ideas weren't panning out. We were getting a lot of feedback saying that people didn't understand it, and people began mentioning things that cued us or clued us into some other options. So what we did was we actually just emailed these people, and using like a simple Google form, we then built out 2 or 3 options using our component system that we had already invested in. And we literally within a day were able to say, I think this is what people are talking about. Let's send them a few more ideas to see if we're on track or not. And so literally clicking on that form and receiving feedback, this is one of the ideas. In fact, this is the idea that resonated most with our customers. But I didn't have to call them up and set up an official kind of user research session. I took some of the value that we had already built in our process and chained it together. And we were able to kind of solve this page management problem earlier on in the process because of that. Here's some design questions that I ask my team that deal with time that in order to make this a little more practical and on a daily level, keeping my designers thinking about design. If you had to make a decision right now, what would you choose? I'm constantly having them think about time. And sometimes they say, I would choose this thing. Great, well, you have 2 more days of design and research. Prove yourself right or wrong. Sometimes we don't have time, and I just want them to think about like making design and decisions. Here's another one. How can you increase the speed of your learning and decision-making cycles? We've tried to do that with our design process and these values in the right, inside of this right methodology. And finally, I think the most important one here is, when do you pay for knowledge, and how much will it cost when you pay for it? This to me underpins like the value of thinking about your design process and the judgment that you need to have inside of an organization to see it grow and to see the company really embrace design, right? It costs something to make a decision. It costs something to learn. And this question has helped us move the business along. Well, not just the design, right? Sometimes we ask the business that. Well, when do you want to learn that? Now or in a year? Because it will cost you. The cost will be different. Anyways, I hope that you can take some of these principles in this right methodology. What's right for Lucid, based off of risk, yield, and time, and what our resources are, might be different for you. But hopefully you can critique and look at how you design with these principles and begin to make improvements there. It's not easy. It's been uncomfortable for some of my designers to have to account for kind of the business view of design. But it's been really good. Ultimately, it helps the design work, more design work, better design work across the finish line and into the hands of our users. And we've really been able to kind of develop more support internally because of thinking this way. So I just wanted to leave you with some of those thoughts and the way we work. And thank you for your time. That's all.